Welcome back to the United Stand. We are joined with transfer expert Ben Jacobs to talk all things Manchester United behind the scenes and also looking ahead to the January transfer window as well. Before we get started, Ben, I've just got to say what an absolutely amazing summer that you had. It was absolutely fantastic. So good, so on the pulse, and thank you for bringing us all the Manchester United news on here as well. I hope you've had a well-deserved break-ish, and we're back to talk about all things Manchester United looking ahead to the season.
Yeah, thank you, first of all, for the kind words. It was a busy window, wasn't it, for Manchester United, ending with Lammens, which was a story that I broke the interest a little bit earlier. And rest never really stopped, to be honest with you. So deadline day happened, and then I flew to Hong Kong. I did some on-stage panels at a conference there. I don't think I really factored in the time difference because my conference was on the 3rd, and I thought I'll sleep on the 2nd. But then, of course, it jumps forward 7 hours. So I only landed from Hong Kong yesterday, and now finally time to rest. But at Manchester United, there is no rest. It's always going to be non-stop.
Exactly, and that's one of the reasons why we love it as well. There's still so much to talk about. I mean, I do want to talk a little bit about the financial situation at Manchester United, Sir Jim Ratcliffe, and plans looking ahead. But I want to get started on the midfield situation. I wanted to ask you, what is the feeling at Manchester United around the fact that they didn't end up signing a midfielder, because we know that Amorim was pushing for one. And there's been a few reports earlier this morning that Manchester United have a plan to sign potentially even Elliot Anderson in January, going for Baleba in the summer. What is your intel on the midfield situation at Manchester United?
Yeah, my intel is, as you say, that Ruben Amorim made it clear he wanted a midfielder, but I think on balance he got much of what he needed across a window where Manchester United did more business than maybe in April or May they thought they were going to do. And it's that sort of age-old, the more you sign, the more you want. And if you're going to break the budget to bring on board 2 number 10s and a number 9 and a goalkeeper, then why not a midfielder? But as I said, when the window was about to shut, there was never going to be any panic buying either. So Carlos Baleba should be seen in a bubble, because that was about making an ambitious elite starting midfielder and trying to bring that signing forwards. But Brighton ultimately said, no chance. And then you had the more economical approach of, was there a name out there that maybe is a bit more short-termist that could be a squad player? And in the end, I think Manchester United felt the right kind of profile was not available. So they were not just going to spend money for the sake of it. In January, it's a tough market. A lot of potential players either won't want to be in the move midway through a World Cup year, or you just get stung with higher prices, because I would term January very much a seller's, not a buyer's market. I think Elliot Anderson will more likely stay at Nottingham Forest through minimum the entire season. He's still relatively new there. We'll obviously have to understand how the change manifests with Ange Postecoglou coming in. But a few players I sense, especially if they're playing regularly, will be reticent to move mid-season. And then as we look to next summer, I do think Manchester United will be back for Carlos Baleba. The better he does, the higher the price. But budget will be there. And as I've said many times, I think there's still a concrete possibility that Bruno Fernandes leaves next summer and Saudi Arabia remain interested. So there could be a scenario where his exit ends up funding a bigger spend next summer. Adam Wharton is another one as well to watch. And I think Wharton would be higher than Elliot Anderson in Manchester United's thinking. And who's to say it would be just Baleba or a name like Wharton? It might be 2 midfielders that come in, because remember, Casemiro has a bit of a question mark, even though he's fallen into favour under Ruben Amorim. There's also a scenario, I think, where 2 midfielders could arrive, because if Kobbie Mainoo doesn't get the game time and the chances that he's looking for, then whereas he's prepared to say, OK, I'll sit and wait, even though he wanted to go out on loan, what happens in 12 months' time if he's still not getting those opportunities? So if they need 1 midfielder now, but Kobbie Mainoo departs, 2 midfielders would likely come through the door. So I think we're in a period now where Manchester United's new collaborative model are looking at all these different options. They're working out what they need. They're seeing how Kobbie Mainoo responds. They're hoping that Manuel Ugarte can really make a statement and he's liked by Ruben Amorim. And then if Casemiro does the job as well, it may be January doesn't require any kind of panic buy unless the right profile becomes available. But I wouldn't get too excited yet about Elliot Anderson, just because one, he's not been at Forest for that long, and two, I think it'd be very difficult to prize somebody away like that midway through a season when many players are looking for stability in a World Cup year, especially if they're already in Thomas Tuchel's plans.
Well, yeah, that's a great update, and there's a couple of things I want to ask you off the back of that. Starting off with Carlos Baleba, I saw a report that was stating that he was pushing Brighton for a move and would continue to push into January. Is he sold on the Manchester United project under Ruben Amorim after discussions with the club?
Well, I think it never got so advanced to the point where the player said, like Brian and Boomer, I only want Manchester United, or I'll wait for you in a year's time. But what's clear is that Baleba was willing to join Manchester United over the summer if Brighton decided to engage, but they didn't. Naturally, part of Manchester United's escalation and push was to lay the groundwork because they know that there will be several other suitors come the summer. So I don't think we're in a situation where we can say if Baleba leaves Brighton, it will definitely be, or it will only be Manchester United. But what's clear is that they're ahead of other clubs, and that's why they held the talks on the player side. They've also got to be able to fund it. And the thing to understand is, despite reports of different numbers, not only have Brighton not named a price, but they also, within their projections using data, think whatever the number is they have now is going to have millions more added onto it between now and the end of the season. And this is where, broadly speaking, Brighton wanting roughly a Moises Caicedo type fee comes from, because they think if he's not quite there yet, he will be in 12 months' time. And if he is in 12 months' time, very rarely with a player of that kind of caliber, do you only get one suitor. If you look at Moises Caicedo, it was Arsenal, Chelsea in the January, player didn't move. And then suddenly it was Liverpool, Chelsea in the summer, and he ended up joining Chelsea. So I do sense that there will be more than one willing suitor prepared to pay potentially over 100 million for Carlos Baleba. But where Manchester United feel quite confident at the moment if they return is the fact that they've done that legwork on the player side. But equally as important is going to be, what can you offer the player on the field in 12 months' time? So one is their Champions League football, and two, as importantly, if there is Champions League football, you get that 20-25% bump in pay packet, because Manchester United have an incentive-driven structure. If they don't have Champions League football, then Baleba would be joining on a lower wage and without Champions League football, and that, of course, is where a disadvantage can potentially be painted compared to other clubs in the market. So I think it's a bit early to be predicting where Baleba will end up, because the better he does, the higher the price. And the better he does, the more inclined he might be to go and play Champions League football next season. But Manchester United are ahead in the sense that they've spoken to the player, he's aware of the project, and all of that may come in handy in 12 months' time when likely, along with others, they'll be back at the table.
Well, that is exactly what I wanted to kind of move on to next. As a Manchester United fan, if you speak about the possibility, not saying it's going to happen, the possibility that you could sign both Adam Wharton and a Baleba, if there could be two midfielders coming into Manchester United, that massively excites the fan base. But my question would be, for Manchester United, how would they be able to afford that? Is it dependent on European football? Because I know Manchester United's plan this season is to get back into European football. But a lot of people would say, well, you know, we could have done with a midfielder to have the team perform at the level it needs to be to get Champions League football, or European football at least. So what is the financial situation at Manchester United? Are the purse strings tight? Is it dependent on European football for next summer and getting them big signings in?
Not necessarily. I mean, it's a complicated question, and context is really important. And when we get into finances, half the chat will be falling asleep. But if you can kind of bear with me here. So number one, it's a 3-year cycle of PSR, and some big amortizations dropped off when the new financial year came in, so in this current 3-year cycle, and more amortization as it stands anyway will drop off when we again jump a year forwards. So that gives you a little bit more leeway. Second thing will obviously be Champions League, and that can help. Third thing will be outgoings, and if Bruno Fernandes goes to Saudi Arabia, there'll be a big fee. If Casemiro departs, there'll be a big wage off the books. So all of that will help and give them a little bit more freedom. Then the complicated part, PSR may not exist going forwards, which may give all clubs a lot more slack to work with. So what's happening at the moment is PSR is the financial domestic rules, but concurrent with that, they're doing this shadow trial, which is more related to UEFA's squad cost control measure. And in other words, and in layman's terms, you get to spend a percentage of between 80 and 90, likely with the domestic rules, of your total income on wages, transfers, and agent fees. Now, if it's just that, making that shift, and it's being shadow trialed at the moment, will give clubs that have big income more leeway to spend. Where it gets complicated is the domestic rules may bring in that squad cost control measure, but in addition have so-called anchoring. And anchoring, in essence, is just a cap to make sure that those that really bring in big money can't just spend, and have a massive advantage over, for example, a newly promoted team. So anchoring takes the television money table, goes to the bottom club, takes their income, times that by a multiple of 5, and I'm aware I'm losing people here, and says that is your total spend cap. But that total spend cap will again still give you more leeway than under PSR. So how can Manchester United finance Baleba or a player like Wharton? First of all, if PSR in the long term is phased out and they have a bit more rope to work with. Second of all, amortization dropping off. So actually a new 3-year cycle being in a stronger position than an old one. And then these outgoings, and you might still get 75, 80 million for Bruno Fernandes. Casemiro's wage off the books will be significant. If it's 2 midfielders, Kobbie Mainoo would likely depart. If it's 1 midfielder, it probably means Kobbie Mainoo is succeeding. So all of these things are helpful. And then the other thing I would mention is that just because Manchester United did various outgoings now, such as the Rasmus Højlund deal, they still have the ability, if they choose, because maybe they feel PSR compliant for the last financial year that's closed, to put the money onto the next financial year. So when you do a loan with an obligation, for example, or if you're Marcus Rashford and it's a loan, but come next summer, he still might go, you have the ability come June to either say, we need it on this current financial year, or maybe we want to put it on the next financial year, and that can give you a bit more flexibility year on year and cycle on cycle in terms of how you declare. So I actually think Manchester United will be fine with the domestic rules. What will be interesting is if they have more of a problem, as Aston Villa are finding, with UEFA. So it's complicated, but there is a way, which is probably the only bit people care about, so you can wake up again, chat. There is a way of adding 2 big name midfielders and still being within the financial rules. And that basically comes from the fact that Manchester United have always had big income, always had decent commercial revenue, and still have some outgoings in their back pocket.
Brilliant, thank you, Ben. And I know you label it boring, but I think it's actually really interesting to understand that side of it. I really enjoy listening to it, and I'm sure quite a few of the viewers do as well. So yeah, it's a good thing to know, and it gives us a little bit of optimism as well, especially when Sir Jim Ratcliffe was on record saying, you know, we would have gone bankrupt by Christmas, etc. So it gives you a little bit of positivity there in terms of spending.
The last thing as well that's worth noting is it's a bit more complicated at Manchester United, but you will have seen Aston Villa sold their women's team, their parent company. Yes. Chelsea sold their women's team, their parent company. Obviously, until Jim Ratcliffe, i.e. therefore Ineos, has full control, it would be a slightly strange move to sell the women's team to Ineos, because then you would have Ineos owning 100% of the women's team and the Glazers being the majority owner at Manchester United. I don't think the optics of that would go down well anyway, even if it benefited Manchester United on the books, because obviously Jim Ratcliffe has said some quite disparaging things, in my opinion, about the women's team. And what's important is, as part of this strategy, the men's team and the women's team are both backed and put on an equal footing. So a lot of people say, can't Ineos or Glazers pull the same trick as Chelsea and be selling property or women's team? But first we would have to clarify, how does any potential group or multi-club work? Because Jim Ratcliffe has Ineos, so technically a pathway to multi-club, but he's not the majority owner at Manchester United. And if you suddenly just plopped the women's team under Ineos for accounting purposes or to give them an equal footing, then the Glazers wouldn't own the women's team anymore and it would be very complicated. So fascinating to all of this in the long run is still, are we going to hear more about Jim Ratcliffe being able to increase his share at Manchester United? Is there a pathway out for the Glazers? Is it going to come before the Old Trafford regeneration? I think unlikely. And that will add clarity to the model. And once you have clarity and unity to the model, so it's not sort of half Radcliffe, half Glazers, half sport, half brand, then you can start talking about these financial tricks, which in the long run could also benefit Manchester United in the same way that it's benefited Chelsea and Aston Villa.
Is that Sir Jim Ratcliffe's intention to eventually have complete ownership of the club?
Well, I think when he released his statement in the takeover process, it was, I want majority and I want control. And there were definitely forms of his bid that ended up dying that were about 100% of the club. I think Ratcliffe isn't thinking at the moment about a particular percentage. He just wants control of the sporting side because he sees the sporting side as his legacy and to an extent the stadium as well. But obviously, the more you do and the more you build and the more you succeed and the more of your own personal money you put in, the bigger percentage of the club you ultimately want. But I think it's too early to say because the Glazers ultimately are staying for as long as they want to stay to get the biggest possible return on investment. And the way these A and B shares work, there is no pathway. So in the end, the structure of the deal required equal consideration to A and B shareholders and didn't allow any ability to say in a year, 5 years, whatever, I'm going to do the same deal at the same rate and buy another 10% and another 10%. So they'd have to come back and again get all the relevant board approvals and SEC declarations and so on. But I do think it's fair to say that if Jim Ratcliffe had the ability to buy more off the Glazers, he would be open to that. A lot will again depend on the Glazers and if they feel that the price is high enough and the return on investment is big enough to eventually leave the football club in the short or medium term future.
Yeah, I think you touched on a point there with the regeneration of Old Trafford that I just wanted to touch on as well. I mean, we are going off on a little bit of a tangent, but I think that's natural with the way
we always do.
Yeah, the way the conversation's developing, you've just got to go with the flow of it. But with the regeneration of Old Trafford, that's obviously going to increase the share price of Manchester United quite significantly, I would imagine. Hence why the Glazers might want to stay until that project is done so they can get the biggest bang for the buck and the biggest return on their investment. With the regeneration of Old Trafford, it was sold to us very quickly, videos coming out for the fans to see, and then we've not really heard much about it since. I mean, is there any updates on the regeneration of Old Trafford about when things might start, where we're up to in terms of the process of going through that?
Yeah, all we really know is that Jim Ratcliffe is a believer in particular that a stadium, by stadium timelines, I should stress, can be built relatively quickly, but you're still talking about 5 years minimum to actually get a project of this magnitude from paper to reality. And even that may prove a little bit premature. So I think in a best case scenario, you would see movement within the next year or two in terms of when are they actually going to have finalized plans, who's going to fund it, what the wider regeneration, not just the stadium, is going to look like. And then from there, you have to consult all the various stakeholders, all the boring bits you never hear about that can take anything between months and years, because there might be residents that are affected, there might be stakeholders, then you start building it. So it wouldn't surprise me if we actually hear very little about this project. Now it's there on paper. What you need to do is actualize your design and then decide who is going to ultimately build it. Then you have to go through all of the different steps, ranging from tweaks to the designs, to speaking to the fan base, to anyone in and around the area that may be affected, to your planning permission. And we still don't have absolute clarity either as to, with the stadium specifically, but also any wider generation that benefits Manchester United Football Club, who exactly is going to pay for it. So it's all very well saying at the end of it, the price of Manchester United with a modern stadium will be higher, but that's higher if the Glazers just put a price on paper and then go. But it's not higher if it's cost you $2 billion to finance it, and then you're paying out the Glazers to get them out of the football club. Whatever's left at the football club has to subsume the costs of all of that construction. And ultimately, if it's Ratcliffe, he would have to dig into his back pocket in addition to buy the Glazers out. So I'm not so sure it's as simple as wait for a modern stadium to develop and then Glazers cash out, because Jim Ratcliffe may actually decide that if he's invested more of his own money and time and energy, maybe he wants to wait a little bit before at least going for any kind of full buyout opportunity. But we're speculating at this point. Regarding the steps, though, if you look at other stadiums that have been built, and I've covered many of these stories like Tottenham Hotspur, for example, or the Chelsea Stadium development, even though on paper at least it's behind Manchester United, you do have these normal steps. So there's 6 months of stakeholders and internal conversations and fan-based discussions. Then usually you get the broad design. Then every aspect of that design has its own post-release after you found your architect and your release of the models. You need all these different meetings with stakeholders. There's health and safety meetings. You've got to find a construction company. And a lot of that will just go under the radar. Then at some point, they'll probably say, okay, we've got the planning permission and we've got the funding in place. And that might be a year down the line. Let's see, it could be sooner. But I think if it was a year down the line, that would be a normal time scale. And then from there, once you've got everything in a row to say we actually can start building this, you then have to understand how long will it actually take, because it is a big project. It's not just a football stadium, it's everything around the football stadium as well. So don't be surprised if it goes quiet, but that is actually quite normal. And then once we know from the beginning of construction to the end how long it will actually take to build, that's when we'll have this stadium could open on this specific date. And if you ask Jim Ratcliffe, he's saying 5 years, so 2030. So either 2029, 2030 or 2030, 2031. But I think from experience and speaking to others, 7 to 8 years seems to be a more realistic time frame. So it wouldn't surprise me if in the end, despite Ratcliffe's desire to do it quicker, this stadium actually maybe becomes a reality in terms of playing in it a few years later than his original 5-year hope or prediction.
Yeah, I mean, do a prediction how old I'm going to be when I enter there. It'd be a fun one to do, but that's really interesting to kind of know the backstory behind that, and hopefully it does happen sooner rather than later, because I know everyone's got a different opinion on the stadium, but for me personally, I think it's something that Manchester United really needs to invest in, and I'd be really excited to see us up and running with a modern stadium that matches the ambition of what the club should have. So, I mean, get your comments in around that as well, and anything you want to ask Ben in this show, remember it's your show as well, get your super chats in and let us know what you are thinking. And also remember after the show as well to head over to That's Football, because we've got, I mean, Premier League football's back, Bundesliga football's back. Friday we have Bundesliga on That's Football live. You get to watch the game as well as see Mark's reactions. Saturday, you have Arsenal versus Nottingham Forest, and we're going to be live at 12:15 for that one. Angie's first game, that's going to be a cracker. Then on Sunday, you have Burnley versus Liverpool, and of course, on the nightstand, Manchester City versus Manchester United, the derby. We're back in action, Ben. Can't wait.
Yeah, and there's some fantastic fixtures to bring us back, including, as you say, the Manchester derby. Looking forward to seeing how Ange fares. And obviously on that Friday, I think we will sort of start to get all the press conferences coming in. A lot of people, I think, will be sympathetic to Nuno and his departure. But obviously it wasn't just a football decision to get rid of Nuno because he was brilliant last season. I think that Nottingham Forest feel they need a more attack-minded brand of football. So by fate, Ange, first game on the Saturday, 12:30. And as a former Spurs manager, he goes to Arsenal. Looking forward to seeing how many of Newcastle's late window signings figure against Wolves. That should be very interesting. And then, of course, the big game will be that Manchester derby. And I think from Manchester United's point of view, we will get a big clue as to whether it's going to be Lammens thrown straight into the deep end or whether Bayindir will continue as number one.
That's what I was coming to next, Ben. That's what I was coming to next, because we spoke previously on the show about, Lammens potentially having to bide his time. Ruben Amorim, he strikes again, and Onana, next thing you know, he's on the plane to Turkey and has completed that loan deal. So now the question is he going to stick with Altay Bayindir, who has been his number one for the opening 3 games of the Premier League, or is he going to throw Senil Lammens right in the deep end and put him in for the Manchester derby? I mean, I saw that you were talking to Fabrizio Romano before this show, and I think there was talk that there's a big chance that Senil Lammens could become number one quite quickly. I mean, what is your feeling around this? Because things changed quite quickly on the Onana front.
Very quickly. I mean, it was a surprise because those close to Onana were saying 2 weeks before the window shut that he was going to stay. And Manchester United sources were saying that any goalkeeper that came in, whether Senil Lammens, who did, or Emi Martinez, would not affect Onana now, simply because he was going off to the Africa Cup of Nations. So having one extra goalkeeper wouldn't require a goalkeeper's exit because Onana would go off to the Africa Cup of Nations. And then if it was Emi Martinez, Onana future probably resolved in January. And if it was Senil Lammens, a goalkeeper, yes, for the now, but kind of for the future. So you still kind of want Onana there. But I think in the end, it was Onana that drove his own opportunity and moves. So Manchester United would have been content just to keep Onana. But Trabzonspor came and not only agreed a loan with Manchester United, but as I revealed, were able to give Onana a significant pay rise because loan deals can have sign-on fees, and the bonuses from the Turkish side mean that Onana is earning a lot more money. And I think in the end, Onana probably sensed that if he went there and got a payday and in addition played every week in the build-up to the Africa Cup of Nations, that would be better. So right now, I would say Senil Lammens is the Manchester United number one. I think he's been brought in to carry that mantra at least until January. And then if the window opens and they decide we need to make another play at an Emi Martinez or a more experienced goalkeeper, they will. Remember, Mike Maignan is a free transfer next summer. So there will be experienced goalkeepers available. But I think Lammens is going to be thrown in at the deep end. And between now and the end of the year, assume the number one from Bayindir and be given every chance to show that he can command that position now. And if he does, then Manchester United solve the solution. And then I think they'll still go out in 2026 and add another goalkeeper, because if that scenario happens, there's no guarantee that Bayindir stays. So this is what I think was pitched to Lammens. And when the deal was not quite done, and there were Turkish clubs chasing after Senil Lammens, and even at one point, if Martinez went, Aston Villa as well, I think the challenge Manchester United had was that Senil Lammens is confident. And he was saying to all suitors, I want to play most weeks, if not every week. And I think at that point, Manchester United with Onana at the club couldn't categorically tell him, you're going to be playing every week. But Villa could if Emi Martinez left, and Galatasaray and others that had looked could also do the same. So I think Manchester United late in the window decided we got to go all in here. They backed Senil Lammens, they did the deal, and he is going to become very quickly Manchester United's number one ahead of Bayindir. That's my feeling speaking to sources. But is that going to happen in the Manchester derby from day one? That's a different question. And I think because he's not been at the club for that long, it wouldn't surprise me if Bayindir starts that game. It's just a personal hunch. It's not really informed. I don't really get in the business of digging too hard on team news because I'm a Premier League commentator for an official broadcaster. But I think Lammens is the number one. Lammens is the one that's going to play the majority of the games once he beds in. But is it too soon for the Manchester derby to just chuck him straight in? Maybe. And it wouldn't surprise me if Ruben Amorim protects Lammens and gives Bayindir a game or two more. But once he's settled, I think there's no doubt that Lammens is above Bayindir in the pecking order.
I mean, I'm really happy to hear that from you, Ben, because, I mean, we've spoken about on the show, just my own personal opinion is I didn't think either goalkeeper was good enough to be number one for Manchester United, Onana or Bayindir. I mean, don't get me wrong, they've both had good points, but they're just not consistently at the level that I would like. Senil Lammens, don't know that much about, but I'm hoping that what people are saying around him is correct, that he is super well scouted, that he is an upcoming prospect that has a lot of hope from the recruitment team, and people think he's going to go on to be one of the next best goalkeepers. I really do hope that. And I mean, my personal opinion is, every single game in the Premier League is a tough game, no matter whether it's a derby or whether it's Brentford away, Sunderland away. They're all tough. But you are correct in the sense of, he has only just got here. Has he had enough training? That's the question I'd have. But I'd be looking to get him straight in personally.
Yeah, I think Sene Lammens is one of two goalkeepers, and they're both from Belgium, that a lot of sources, a lot of scouts, a lot of people in the game are speaking about as having big futures. The others is Mike Penders, who's on loan at Strasbourg from Chelsea. And a lot of the attributes that Lammens has are very important for a Premier League goalkeeper, particularly calmness of both thought and with the ball at his feet. And when you're under pressure, fast-paced game, playing out from the back, then these attributes, this ability to sort of slow things down in your head, are very important. And I've seen quite a lot of him, and I've been very impressed by his decision-making. He's mentally strong. He's an excellent shot stopper. And I think that instinctiveness and that ability to make saves that are based on XG, not ones that you're supposed to make, will obviously be very important. But at the other extreme, he does the basics very well. And I think that was in many ways Onana's undoing. He's very comfortable and very natural with both of his feet. He's decent with his ball distribution. Where I think he can improve is with his vocalness. So he knows what he wants to do, but at times I think he needs to command and shout to others in front of him what they need to do. And then the other thing is that he has to learn, in my opinion, to be more dominant between his line and the penalty spot. And this is sometimes something that coaches are on about to goalkeepers. So where he's really good is when he's in quite a static position, i.e. facing a corner, facing a free kick. There's a predictability about the ball's either going to go low or high or over the wall. He's very good at that. And what you'll see is, like Petr Cech, he invites the easiest, most enticing part of the goal, which in most of these circumstances that I reference is your near post. And he steps 1 yard off his line or one other yard to his left or right, depending on where the ball is. And he says, if you want to go for that spot, then I'm going to take a step towards the harder part of the goal to make the save. And if you want to go for my near post and beat me down low, then go for it. There's a slightly bigger area, but he'll get down and make that save because he's big, he's tall, he's athletic, he's quick. And Petr Cech was exactly like that. Where there's room for improvement is he's often quite content to predict what the ball is going to do from, say, a corner, a set piece, a cross. So he might stay on his line a little bit and back himself to make that save or that punch. So if you think to the Bayindir goal that was conceded against Arsenal, he was doing that. He was watching it, he flapped at it, he conceded a goal. There's very rare instances of that with Sene Lammens. But what he needs to do sometimes more is predict the unpredictable and get off his line a bit earlier into the 6 yard area, or sometimes towards the penalty spot as well, and take more of that gamble and kind of win the ball, punch the ball, catch the ball in a crowd, rather than necessarily backing himself on his own line to make the save. Now, that's a very minor and specific constructive criticism, but that's an area of his game to be a little bit more hot-footed, to get off his line a little bit more often. But he's a very complete goalkeeper for his age. He's quite mature for his age as well. And I think he'll take to the Premier League very quickly.
I love to hear that, Ben, and thank you very much for someone who has seen quite a bit of him to give us that kind of detailed explanation of his game. I think a lot of the viewers will appreciate that, and Daniel Thompson's just put in the chat as well. What's a real help for someone like Lammens is that our centre-backs and defence are good at the moment, and there's a leadership in there, so that'll help Lammens progress and improve quicker and become more confident. I mean, I would like to think so. So hopefully he can get off to a good start and it will prove to be a good signing for Manchester United. Just touching on the Manchester derby a little bit. I mean, I'm kind of asking this in hopes you might know something, but I'm not expecting you to give a full rundown of it, but maybe you will. Do you have any updates on the Cunha and Mount injuries?
Yeah, so with Cunha, there was a secondary scan that took place last week, and I think they're waiting to determine the exact severity. I don't think that it's so serious that it should be seen as concern. But I also don't think it was only like a grade 1 tear, which would be like 3-4 weeks out. So it's somewhere in between that 4 and 12 weeks, hopefully more like 5-6 weeks. But I wouldn't want to speculate at this point because I don't think they're done with the testing. Mount at this stage, I don't have a huge update, to be perfectly honest with you. But it's obvious that he'll face a number of weeks on the sidelines too. So they're not going to be involved this weekend. They're not going to be back so imminently that they won't need cover. But it's a chance, in my opinion, because Cunha was at times playing as a 9 while Benjamin Sesko bedded in. And obviously with Mount, it's kind of great to see him back, and he's very liked by Ruben Amorim. But in his absence, you'll likely see Sesko starting leading the line for Cunha. Bryan Mbeumo getting to play at a 10. Bruno Fernandes with Mount out, maybe given a little bit more freedom. And then we wait and see who he picks in midfield and whether Kobbie Mainoo does get opportunities. So it's, I think, a forced opportunity to put Sesko right up top. And I think Cunha will be missed. But because he was playing in a secondary position while Sesko bedded in, it's not like we've seen as much of Cunha playing as a number 10. And he hasn't yet created that sort of chemistry. I don't think any of the new signings have clicked to the degree at this point where any of these partnerships have really been built. So I think that Ruben Amorim will see it as an opportunity to rotate. And I don't think either the Mount or the Cunha injuries are so serious that they're massive long-term causes for concern.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that they recover quickly and can be back in action. I think they've both had a great start to the season, but they are going to be a miss. But like you said, I mean, I'd like to see Benjamin Sesko get some game time. I mean, how great would it be if he got his first Manchester United goal in the derby? I mean, just on that quickly, Ben, what is the feeling around Benjamin Sesko at the club? Because I know a few fans are worried about maybe Ruben Amorim's thoughts on him because he's not started in the Premier League. And then when Cunha went off with injury, he opted for Xerxes over Sesko. But is he liked by Ruben Amorim and what is the feeling around him at the club?
Yeah, I mean, Benjamin Sesko was, on the one hand, a long-standing target dating back to last summer, but it's obvious he wasn't the first choice target because Manchester United went originally for Liam Delap, for example, and then there's sort of mixed sourcing around just how strong or intent they were on, for example, adding Victor Gyökeres. But we know that just before his Arsenal move, there was at least a conversation that took place. So when they settled on Benjamin Sesko, it was after missing out on some other targets, particularly Delap, who heading into the window was widely seen as the top choice. And I think if Manchester United had won the Europa League final, Delap would have had a big decision to make, because my feeling and my reporting reflected this at the time was that Delap was very open to moving back to Manchester and playing for Manchester United. But because it's a World Cup year, specifically Champions League football this season, very important to him. So he picked Chelsea, they made a strong pitch, and then obviously Manchester United moved on to other targets. The thing to understand about this recruitment model as well is that it's highly collaborative. And by that, it's not just a case of lots of cooks. They have to disagree for the model to be functional. And if they don't, then you get a lot of yes people without any healthy debate. And I preface that because when I say Ruben Amorim put forwards Ollie Watkins, that doesn't mean he doesn't want Benjamin Sesko. That doesn't mean that he's not impressed by the player. Because obviously when you have deep pools of recruitment options, if you don't get your first or your second choice, you are still very satisfied with the third and the fourth. But the point here is when they had that debate, which you need to get to the right decision, Ruben Amorim was pushing for proven Premier League experience, as you'd expect, because if he knows if Manchester United replicate the league season they had last campaign, he's probably out of a job. So, of course, your manager wants an instant return. But Christopher Vidal was pushing Benjamin Sesko. And in the end, Amorim decided, I've got enough Premier League experience in Cunha and Mbeumo, plus players like Bruno Fernandes. So let's go for the younger player who in the long run will prove better value for money. And from what I understand so far, in training, both players and also Amorim have been very impressed by Benjamin Sesko, not just in terms of his work ethic and his application, but the fit within the system. And a lot of other players that I've spoken to directly without naming names at Manchester United say they think in this system, Sesko is a better fit than Ollie Watkins, and he's going to get the best out of other players at the football club. And I think Ruben Amorim in particular has been very pleasantly surprised by how quickly Sesko has fitted into this dressing room and this culture. We know that he offers a lot in the box. We know he's a physical presence. We know he's a target man, but he's also pretty deft with his feet as well and shows good movement off the ball. What Amorim is saying to Sesko, from what I'm told, is that yes, you're a defined 9, but Cunha in game management might move into the 9, and Mbeumo might move into the 9, Mount might move into the 9, Fernandes might move into the 9. So a lot of what they've been working on with Benjamin Sesko before he gets his first start, because it was different at Leipzig where he had a more defined role, is that versatility. And I think Josh Zirkzee, even though he's not had a great goal-scoring output, is very good at that. Yeah. Understanding when to drop deeper, understanding when to defend. So the 9 at Manchester United is 9 by name, but by nature, it's much more fluid because a lot of these other players are going to push into that area. And Sesko has to have that awareness to know when to drop deeper, when to filter into a wide area or the back post, when to do a give and go, when to have his back to goal. And all of that might sound basic because that's what a striker does, but it's more complicated at Manchester United than it was at Leipzig because that 9 is much more fluid. And I think that's why he's not started at the moment. That's why they're doing one-on work with him. And when he gets that chemistry with his teammates, which is different to the chemistry to that of Leipzig, that's when he'll start having an impact and scoring goals.
Very interesting on Benjamin Sesko. I mean, I think that will put a lot of fans' minds at ease a little bit, and I think it gets us excited as well, looking towards the derby and whether he will get that start or whether he might just go one more game before he gives him that start with the...
I mean, I think he starts, but it's only a personal opinion, but there is no ability to put Cunha there.
I'd like to think he does, but I'm just thinking he might go with Joshua Zirkzee. I don't know.
He could do, and I think Zirkzee would be a very interesting one. What's going to be interesting for me is I don't think this is a derby, which sounds odd because you look at the weapons on both sides, but I don't think this is a derby, particularly for Man United away, that is going to be won by, as we may usually say, that brilliant attacking bit of flair or quality. I actually think in a weird way, you've got a Manchester United side, either with Bayindir, and there is a bit of a question mark there, or a new goalkeeper. And you've got a Man City side that on paper, brilliant going forwards, but very susceptible at the back. You've got a Man United defence that under Ruben Amorim have made a lot of errors. I think this is a derby where whatever you do and pick in the final third, it's about getting that back line right. And whichever pairing of centre-backs in particular for me does their job and is not error prone, that's the kind of team that might sneak what I think will be quite a low scoring and ugly and drab in many ways Manchester derby. Because yes, both teams can be impressive going forwards, but they've got to get those basics right at the back. And the team that makes the least errors for me will actually be the ones that end up winning this Manchester derby. So it might help to have the defensive qualities and the hold-up play of Zirkzee. So that could be a good shout. But if I was to make a prediction, I would say Sesko starts this game.
The team with Mbeumo on, it's winning, Ben. Mbeumo is going to play a part, I have a feeling. He started the season super well. But I agree with you, I think it's going to be a really, really close derby. I mean, the interesting one that you spoke about is if Bruno Fernandes does push into that number 10 role, whether Kobbie Mainoo will start there in the midfield. Obviously had a big say on derbies in the past, especially one at Wembley where we won the FA Cup. But on Kobbie Mainoo, I wanted to ask you actually, now that his loan move didn't go through, do you think he will sign a new contract? And why do you think that contract's taking quite a fair bit of time?
Yeah, I think because as we've seen in practice, he's not seen yet as a fit within Ruben Amorim's system and he wants to play. And again, it's a World Cup year, so you kind of can't blame him for that. I think it's nice to see a player almost say, don't want to leave this football club. I only want to go out on loan. But from the football club's perspective, it was always going to be sale or nothing. And still, if he left, it would be a reluctant sale and it would also present pure profit on the books, which is a positive. But it's too early to say what's going to happen next, because I think Manchester United may now be reticent, knowing that the player was looking for other opportunities to just land a new contract. And Mainoo may be reticent to sign that new contract, knowing that if he gets locked in and doesn't get the minutes, in a year's time, he may be back where he started. But of course, you have the other aspect to this, which is just, does Kobbie Mainoo, even as a squad player, deserve a bump in his current wage? And I think the answer to that question is yes. So what I think may happen is a contract, signed or not signed, may not influence anything. It may be more about just, can you reward the player, protect the value to an extent, but still have an understanding, even if one is signed, that if it's not going according to plan for all parties, summer 2026, Manchester United will be more open to either a loan or a permanent solution. And then regarding why didn't Mainoo get his move, there wasn't actually, as far as I'm aware, a concrete offer to Manchester United anyway that late in the window. So, of course, there was interest from Napoli, and we know historically Newcastle and Chelsea have looked at Kobbie Mainoo as well. But I'm not actually aware of anyone presenting a formal offer to Manchester United in the final days of the window. So even if Mainoo wanted to leave, it would have been a race against time to get something over the line. So I wouldn't worry too much about will there or won't there be a new contract, because if there is a contract, I'm not so sure now that it automatically means he's definitely staying for the long-term future. And if there isn't a new contract, it's probably because all parties want to see how much he plays before committing to offering or signing anything.
Yeah, it's an interesting one with Kobbie Mainoo. I hope he does get the opportunity, and what an opportunity it would be against Manchester City to capitalise on the unfortunate injuries of Cunha and Mount and kind of make a play for your spot in the team.
Yeah, but I think
go on, Ben.
The sort of challenge for Mainoo is that Manuel Ugarte is liked by Ruben Amorim. Casemiro's ahead of him at the moment, but if Casemiro goes and they sign one or two midfielders, then Kobbie Mainoo is going to be thinking somebody else is going to be coming in. And I can tell you one thing for sure. Next summer, Manchester United, if they only had one, are going to be adding a starting midfielder. It won't be a squad player. It won't be somebody that there's a debate over as to whether they will or won't be in that starting 11. It will be a Carlos Baleba or Angelo Stiller or Adam Wharton type player that arrives on big money, big fee, and will, when fit, be in that starting 11. So the challenge for Kobbie Mainoo is almost thinking, if one's coming in a year and is going to be a starter, if Ugarte does well or Casemiro stays another year, then he's even further down the pecking order, unless somehow he can play his way into Ruben Amorim's thinking, which is harder when the manager doesn't see him as a perfect fit. So luckily, he's now got time, because there's no ability to sign a midfielder and there's no guarantee that one comes in January. But that's where this wait and see approach on the Mainoo or the Manchester United side may come in. And like I said before, even if a new deal is signed, I don't think that closes the chapter, because still, if a wage is given that rewards Mainoo and a new deal is signed to protect his value, if it doesn't go according to plan in the next 12 months, then Mainoo's going to be back where he started and still probably going to ask the club to either leave on loan or permanently.
Yeah, I mean, let's hope he can make an impact. I mean, just on Ugarte there, Ben, because this is something I wanted to touch on earlier, but we got sidetracked. And it's funny, isn't it? The transfer window isn't even open yet. We've spoken for 52 minutes and have enjoyed every single second.
Typical us.
Exactly. That's what we do. Ben and Beth's talk shows. But on Manuel Ugarte, there's a quote that kind of just is in my brain about what Omar Barada said, and it is that players won't get infinite amount of time now at Manchester United. Well, it was along the lines of that, and after 2 years they will be assessed on their impact in the team and whether they're going to be making it at Manchester United. I know you've said multiple times that Manuel Ugarte is liked by Ruben Amorim, but the fact of the matter is after this year it is 2 year point, and he's not a starter in the team currently. Look, I know he's young, but when Ruben Amorim first came in, he didn't even really want to use Casemiro, and now he's his starter with Bruno. And okay, yeah, Ugarte does get cameos here and there, but it doesn't feel like he trusts him yet to hold in that midfield.
Yeah, I think the challenge with Ugarte is he hasn't quite lived up to his billing, or he hasn't actually lived up to his billing at all. But like I say, a bit like Mason Mount, I think he is just a player that Ruben Amorim thinks could suddenly click and be very important. And some of that, I think, is just down to confidence. And at times when you're stuck in that centre of the park and there's no chemistry, fluidity, players tracking back, midfield's getting caught in transition, you can really feel quite alone there. And I think Ugarte is being encouraged behind the scenes to sort of build up that leadership and that mental toughness to respond in moments of adversity. And that's why he's not playing at the moment. But actually, if you just look at the attributes rather than the mental side, which always will inform a player's performance, Ruben Amorim likes the fact that he's a ball winner. He's got a high work rate. He's an athlete. He can be relatively tenacious. He can be an aggressive counter presser. And on paper, that's what Amorim wants. But in practice, we've not seen that from Manuel Ugarte. And I think that's part down also to the chemistry and the collective confidence of players around him. So I think it's a strange one, because if Man United get going, I think Ugarte gets going.
I agree with you.
And actually, at the moment, the irony is you need somebody in that centre of the park that says, well, we've not got going, and I'm going to lead by example. We've not got going, and I'm going to be the vocal one. We've not got going, and I'm going to be pulling players around me and saying, what on earth are you doing? Because these basics are not being done right. And I think he's just that sort of infectious type of player as a character, where he catches the bug when it's going well, and he catches the bug when it's not going so well as well. And I think this is where they're trying to work with him to make him a bit more individualistic and a bit more bullish about changing things as an individual and not looking around for others to kind of help raise his level. So that can be a good thing, because if this project starts moving in the right direction and winning becomes more serial and automatic, then Ugarte will thrive, in my opinion. And that's why, as far as I'm aware, Ruben Amorim is willing to give Ugarte more time.
That, I think, is a good kind of analysis of Ugarte at his current moment in time. For me, I think what he needs to improve is just his quickness on the ball. I think sometimes he feels like he maybe has a little bit more time than he does, and then if he's under pressure can make poor decisions, which ends up losing the ball in really dangerous areas, which I think few people have got frustrated with. And then when you're in that frame of mind that you've done it a few times, it's in your head, then you're overthinking it, and the mistakes kind of carry on. So let's see how he progresses. I think it's a really, really important season for him, and hopefully he can come through it and be that player that we thought we were getting. Because with Ugarte, for me, he's had some performances where it's like man of the match, fantastic, and then next game he'll drop one where it's like, oh, he needs to come off. Like, this is, every kind of pass is just off, and it's not working. So I think he just needs to get that consistency up and confidence. And
also, if you sort of look at the attributes from PSG, a lot of them haven't translated yet into the Premier League. Mm-hmm. So he had the second best tackles per 90 across all of Europe's 5 leagues in the season before he joined Manchester United. He was hungry. He had unlimited energy. He was in, I think, the 99th percentile, which is basically extraordinary for so-called disrupting opposition moves. So he's winning back the ball, or he's stifling or slowing down a counter-attack. And that's a very underrated quality that I think you'll hear more of in the Premier League now as we get more data, not just winning the ball back, but slowing down a transition, a counter-attack against you, because even just buying a second or two might be the difference between somebody else tracking back. So that's an important part of his qualities that haven't really translated yet to Manchester United, but he was excellent when he was there at PSG. And then I just think weakness-wise, it's kind of important to note that if you're looking, for example, at Rodri or even Casemiro at Manchester United, or maybe Frankie de Jong, what you see from Rodri and definitely de Jong, to an extent Casemiro, but not as much, and definitely not from Ugarte, is progressive passing. And this is an area I think they're working on with Ugarte day on day. So when you have a number 6 who's high energy, tenacious, ball winner, that's one part of the game. And, great, stop a counter-attack, win a ball back, let Bruno Fernandes make the pass, let Mason Mount get the assist, let Mbeumo score the goal. But actually, if you look at Rodri and his Ballon d'Or stats, he's probably got 3 times the amount per 90 minutes of progressive passing. So that's when you need the speed of thought and vision as a 6 to win the ball and be like, I'm not going to linger on it. I'm not going to take an extra second. I'm not going to play a short pass. I'm not going to hold it up. I'm going to look up and I'm going to do something incisive with the ball to set an attack in motion. And Rodri's brilliant at that, and so is De Jong. And I think Ugarte still has room for improvement.
Yeah, well, let's hope the coaches can work their magic behind the scenes. Ben, I think we're all out of time for today. It's absolutely flown by, and it's been great to kind of catch up on Manchester United and what's been going on behind the scenes and everything that's been going on. I mean, the goalkeeper situation is the thing that I feel like is most prominent on what's going to happen in the derby. But it's been brilliant to catch up and talk all things Manchester United.
Look forward to speaking to you next week, and no doubt never a quiet week in Manchester United. So we'll debrief on the Manchester derby, which I'm sure will be a fantastic game.
Yes, we'll have to see if any of our predictions came true for sure. And everybody else as well, make sure you go over to That's Football after this and be prepared that the Premier League is back, Bundesliga is back. Like I said midway throughout the show, we've got so much going on the United Stand and on That's Football. Bundesliga on Friday, live game, and finishing off with the derby on the United Stand. Build-up show, all the match day stuff. We've got a great derby day preview for you coming on Saturday morning as well. Make sure you go and catch it. But Ben, thank you very much.
Speak next week.
Thank you, everyone.